Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining the September 2022 meeting of the Montgomery County Civic Federation. We meet monthly, except for the summer, on the second Monday of the month. And our meetings are public and you're welcome to join us. We've got a good group of people tonight to talk about a very important subject, and we will get to that directly after we do a little Federation business, which is pretty straightforward. The first thing we do is we ask for a motion to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting?
I make a motion to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting.
Was it seconded? It's been first and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The agenda is adopted. The next thing is to approve the minutes from our June 13th general meeting. I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes. It's on page 23 of the newsletter that you received. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Elizabeth
I make
Joyce?
a motion to approve the minutes.
Liz is
Beat you to it.
it made a motion and Jerry is second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Abstentions? The minutes were approved. Thank you so much, Karen, for the minutes. We appreciate all the work that you do. I commend to your attention, everybody, the Civic Federation newsletters, which you can find online at montgomerycivic.org. There's lots of good stuff in there, and I think the September, this issue was a particularly good one, as among other things, it talks about some of the climate action accomplishments that the county has to reduce climate-related risk. Our next order of business is the treasurer's report. Jerry?
I would like to remind all members of the Montgomery County Civic Federation, Inc. that dues for the year starting July 1st, 2022 are now due. The following is the treasurer's report for a little over 2 months so far. We've had membership dues of $385 that we've received. We've had expenditures for website of $196 and miscellaneous charges of $3, giving us a total expenses of $199, giving us a net income for the period of $186, and our current bank balance is $8,740. If there are any questions, let me know.
Thank you so much, Jerry. We appreciate your work. We don't know what we would do without you. Next order of business is just general announcements before we go into our evening's program. Does anybody have anything they'd like to say for the good of the order? Or Peggy Dennis? You are muted, Peggy.
Can you
There you
hear
go.
me?
Yep.
Okay. This fits in with the whole emphasis on Thrive. On Tuesday, October 11, the day after our October meeting, there will be an open meeting at the Silver Spring Civic Center. I've sent out all the information to both Alan and Jackie, and it should be in the October newsletter. They will have a panel discussing Thrive in Montgomery County's housing problems, and it's a perfect way for all the people who are opposed to Thrive to both organize themselves to get up and speak at that presentation. I forgot to say, it's Kojo in your community with WAMU radio. Good opportunity to not only give the objections, but to give the many things that could be done to improve the housing situation without passing Thrive. So that information should be available. You do have to register in advance, but it is free.
Thank you, Peggy. And I believe it's been posted on the Civic Federation Facebook page. Elizabeth Joyce, do you have something you'd like to say?
I can stress how important this forum is, because all mainstream media, almost entirely, has been pro-Thrive and following the talking points of the planning board and of the advocates that are aligned with them. Please register immediately. And I'm going to be in touch with WAMU to ask them please to present a balanced panel so that the people who listen will get both sides of the story, because so far with the Washington Post and almost all the media, all they get is what the planning board wants them to hear. And the facts are on the other side.
Okay, thank you.
Sign up.
Thank you so much, Liz. Like I said, the link is on the Civic Federation Facebook page for those of you who go there frequently. Not enough of you, by the way, but for those of you who do, that link is there. Anybody else have any announcements they'd like to make for the good of the group? I would just mention this, that this year Montgomery County will again have its Thanksgiving Day parade. It's not Thanksgiving Day, it's the Saturday before. Every group in the county is eligible to participate. There's a deadline coming up. I think it's September 15th. You just go online and you can register your group. My civic association, the Park Hill Civic Association, has been participating for the last 8 or 9 years, maybe 10 years. And it's a good way to develop solidarity in the community. And it's a good time. If you get there early enough, you can see the balloons arrive and the horses and all that good stuff. And then they rebroadcast it on Thursday morning, on Thanksgiving morning. So there is a link in this month's Civic Fed News on page 15th. If you'd like to get your group, your civic association, your homeowners association, your environmental advocacy group, your housing advocacy group to participate, it's a good time, weather permitting. Anybody else have anything to say for the group? Okay, well, let's jump right into our program. Our guest tonight is Alissa Pier. Alissa joined us for our October 2021 Civic Fed meeting when we were discussing our early opinions of the Thrive Montgomery 2050 document. Alissa has served on the Minneapolis Planning Commission. She's a honored or well-recognized architect, and she was just a joy to have talk to us almost a year ago. And we've posted some articles that she's participated in on our Civic Federation website, and we learned a lot about her. We recorded our meeting with her last October. It was by far the most popular video that we've done over the course of time that we've been doing videos. So we're so happy to have her join us. And she has a plan about how she'd like to present this evening. And then hopefully she'll give us some time at the end to ask some questions. So I am going to figure some way to feature her and turn the program over to Alissa Pier. Alissa, please.
Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Yay. Okay. So tonight is a little different than the last time in that I don't have a prepared PowerPoint to share with you. I really just went through the Thrive draft document, and then the more recent one I got, I went through, I was kind of spending a little more time on it, so I didn't make it all the way through, but a lot of the policies appear to be the same, if not pretty darn close to the one I saw from the end of October last year. So I'm going through and I kind of made notes to myself. So I thought I would just, if it's okay with you, I would just highlight a few of the things that stuck out to me. So I'm looking this way because my monitor that has the PDF of that document is over there, but you guys are over here. So sorry if it's throwing you off a little bit here. I just wanted to touch on a few things. And then what I thought I'd do is I would then open it up so people could ask questions, because maybe there's some issue that is on your mind that that you want to get some feedback on that I'm not going to necessarily touch on otherwise. So I just, in general, looking at the document, so I was intrigued to note that there's a move to separate it from this other housing, attainable housing something.
That's right.
Yeah, and so I found that curious. On one hand, it makes total sense. On the other hand, part of me was wondering if that if the goal of that is just to kind of soothe over some of the rough edges that might upset people, because there's nothing really specific to hang your hat on. It's all kind of, oh, this is a policy, this is a goal, it's a strategic thing, it's not going to affect zoning yet, kind of thing, to kind of get it over the finish line. And then once that happens, you have this document that then informs zoning. And I don't know if this Thrive 2050 has the same gravity to it as our Minneapolis 2040 plan did, which of course is our comprehensive plan. It guides our policies, so that way when we did the updates to the zoning, which our legislature requires us to do within a certain time period after we adopt our comprehensive plan, the zoning has to reflect the policies in our comp plan. So I did have questions about, I assumed it was similar, and that this document is like a guiding document, and that the follow-up will be updating the zoning code to reflect what this is saying. Is that accurate, or are they two separate things?
I think you're right on that the housing policy will be informed by the Thrive 2050 document. And that's our concern, quite frankly.
Yeah. So I think that on one hand, separating them is a good thing, because it seemed like there was already a presumption of how that was going to go, which kind of precludes public input. But at the same time, separating them also disassociates immediate outcomes that are really visible. So on one hand, if they were proceeding in parallel, and you would say, well, for example, in order to accommodate these thousands, tens of thousands, or at one point I saw 172, I think, dwelling units that need to be created, what would the zoning need to look like physically to make that happen? Like, how radically different would our landscape have to be, proverbially and literally, to make that happen? And I think seeing that visual sometimes will either make people go, oh, okay, that's not too bad, or go, holy moly, what the what, that's not what we envisioned, because it's really easy to hide things in vague statements about, oh, we want, sustainability. Well, who doesn't, right? But what does that mean? How does that entity in the position of crafting policy interpret achieving that goal, as opposed to how, the reader might interpret it? So I think that there's a little bit of a danger in disassociating them entirely, only because it's an easy way to hide it by saying, like, I think at one point there was an emphasis in the document where they had to say, yeah, Thrive Montgomery 2050 does not change zoning. And I think to the average person, it's not the document that changes the zoning. It's the zoning that gives change afterward to match this document. So there's a little bit of a red flag there in my mind, because that happened in Minneapolis. A lot of the things we asked for and safeguards we asked for, we were told, oh, don't worry about it. This isn't a zoning thing. This is just a guiding document. This is just guiding principles. And then the moment it got approved, all these zoning changes happened, and there was no way to put any safeguards in, because they said, well, no, because that wasn't called out in our comp plan. Our guiding document didn't call for that. So because of that, we have to adhere to that. And so I feel like it's a little bit of a bait and switch in a way. So I'm just caution there. Just maybe it's not. Maybe they're all on the up and up, but it caught my attention as something that I was a little leery of myself. I don't know if that strikes a chord with anybody, but let's see here. Okay, so there did seem to be also a lot of leaning on environmental advantages or environmental impacts, but it seemed largely as though the policy that would be coming out of it, based on what I read, was largely geared toward having new construction, as if new construction is greener than existing houses, which in reality, the most sustainable building is one that already exists, believe it or not. Like, the embodied energy of an existing house or building is a lot more green than tearing it down and building something new. At part because the thing that's new might not be any more sustainable or energy efficient, but also, even if it was, there's still a lot of embodied energy that went into that. So we have to think of things globally. I did see that in their one document, they specifically call that out as environmental advantages to new construction and improved stormwater management with clean building materials and technology, yada, yada. And then it seems to imply that,
I was just laughing.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that preservation and renovation of currently affordable housing can contribute to environmental goals. And I would argue that it doesn't matter if it's currently affordable or not. Preservation and renovation of existing buildings is a green initiative in and of itself. So I think that there's they're showing their hand a little bit, that they I would assume whoever wrote this doesn't really believe that existing or old houses or old buildings or apartment buildings have any environmental benefits, when that's not true. And then later on, when I actually read through some policy things near the end of the document, it mentions improvements, and I just think they need to actually, I think they're missing the point, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is when we talk about environmental sustainability and why it's important, it's not only important because, you know, obviously climate change is happening and all of our insurance rates are going up because of all these natural disasters that are happening all the time, right? So number one, there's an impact on affordability there because insurance rates are rising and at like 10 to 20% jumps every year. And that's not affordable for anybody. But particularly for families struggling to make it by, right? So you have that impact. But on top of that, when they talk about this, they seem to think of it only in terms of fixtures conserving water, or they don't talk about the fact that it's worthwhile to consider that a larger upfront investment in, you know, energy efficient improvements to a building or new construction can actually make housing more affordable in and of itself, like a better insulated building, more efficient appliance. All these things actually make housing more, and didn't see anything anywhere in the document that tied that together as an affordability tool, right? It seemed to just imply it's a warm fuzzy to say we're doing green things for the environment and blah, 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 and energy goals, but it didn't really explain. In fact, it literally uses the term eco-friendly. That's great, but in reality, that's actually a real way. If you can fix people's energy costs, like if, for example, whether they have new or existing construction, if they have all their energy generated on site through solar panels or heat pumps or however they manage to do it, or it's just a really well insulated building, which you can do in old houses, that alone helps them, because then all of a sudden that this very volatile energy market that really, you know, winter spikes, so people are worried to turn the heat on or whatever, and then in the summer air conditioning costs not rise, that would actually be a really stabilizing factor that might help with displacement, because then you only have to focus on a couple other things like it's an affordability tool, and they're treating it kind of like a warm fuzzy afterthought, and it really needs to be part of the cornerstone to this. And when I looked at the rest of the plan, I didn't really see much about restricting the footprint of things on a site itself. I saw about restricting development areas, and it had a lot of things about urban sprawl, and you know, I assume it's a nod to one-story strip malls and big gaping parking lots and all those sorts of things. But I didn't see a lot saying, regardless of the density on a site, we should make an effort to make sure that when we build on a site, whether it's a single family house or a multifamily building, there needs to be green space. And not only, you know, for the benefits that we all enjoy when we see trees and grass and plants and flowers and all those kind of emotional benefits, but also for like really important things around like stormwater management on site. I mean, we're kind of looking at the next crisis. We have energy crisis. We're going to have a water crisis pretty soon. And if we aren't managing our stormwater appropriately on site, we're putting a lot of stress on our infrastructure, and also not really making a more sustainable environment to grow things in. Because that's the other thing that, you know, I think we've had the, if I can say, advantage of having gone through a pandemic, is people in food deserts kind of had to figure out how they were going to get by with a loss of income or a loss of amenities. So a lot of people, at least in this neck of the woods, started doing almost like another round of victory gardens, if you can harken back in the days of the war, actually reclaiming urban infill lots and growing food and community gardens. So when we think about that, when we think about, especially about how this plan had such a heavy emphasis on multifamily housing, where are the people in the multifamily housing going to recreate? Where are their children going to play? Where are they going to walk their dog? Where are they going to lay down and read a book? Where are they going to have a picnic? Where are they going to have a garden? And really, aside from the food benefits of having a garden, which I don't think can be emphasized enough, and growing things locally, which again, cut down on auto emissions, because we're not hauling food from a farm into an urban core and then having a markup and blah, blah, blah. But there's also psychological benefits to actually being out and, growing something. So I feel like this is really, and you don't even have to be into gardening to be into this, to understand that there's things that you will deny people forevermore if you don't allocate space for them. And some of that space literally means space. Like in the rush to have density, you shouldn't pack every square inch. And I didn't see anything about preserving green space. That way everybody has access to green space. It seemed more like we'll make these, really compact, dense areas which was then a little bit contradictory because I believe the thing was, what is it called? Something, everything, or more of everything. More of everything. Well, really? Like some things, yeah, other things. I mean, I'm kind of a everything in moderation kind of person. So I was like, it's not really more of everything. And while they're 15-minute city, and I'm going to ramble, and I'm sorry if it bothers any of you, I'm really sorry. The 15-minute city thing. I mean, I hear you. It's great if you can have all of your needs met within walking distance of your home. I mean, seriously, good for you. You know how many people in this country actually enjoy that luxury? Very few. And if you're telling me that you're going to make it so every household in this county has grocery stores and clinics and schools and small businesses and restaurants and parks and, go on and on and on within a 15-minute walk, I really want to see that map then, because as much as that's awesome, let's face it, that's not possible. And especially not possible in existing urban areas where everything's already built up and the vacant lots that are left over aren't necessarily conducive to the missing amenities that they don't have. So having this idealized version is great, but it's a chicken and an egg, right? If you want it to be that way, what comes first? You can't push the people there and not give them any of the supports they need, such as food and healthcare and amenities. Or do you provide the amenities somehow, knowing there's not necessarily a disposable income to support them financially? I mean, it's one of those things they have to figure out. And I'm afraid that just pushing more housing together doesn't necessarily make that happen, especially if you don't put safeguards in place to make sure that when you do get to that point, let's say they do achieve that kind of residential density, who's controlling the commercial market then? And are we then having to subsidize that to incentivize owners of commercial land to then lease to certain things like grocery stores or a dry cleaner or what a sit down restaurant as opposed to a mobile phone store or a check cashing place, or things that they know they can bank their buck on and don't really care about improving their investment because they're making enough off it. So I think we need to think long and hard about how things actually occur in the areas that they're most apparently concerned about, and make realistic strides and actually do policy and making safeguards that make actually a real difference, right? So I'm a little bit torn on it a little bit. So anyway, let's see. I wrote a lot of little notes here, so I'm sorry. Okay, so another thing that I noticed, and I harped on this last time, but I'm going to mention it again. A lot of it was about matching supply with demand, and it seemed focused again on completely dwelling unit quantities and not necessarily dwelling unit type. And when it mentions type in the plan, I think it's alluding to the difference between single family home or multifamily building. And I'm more concerned about unit type, not unit quantity. Some of the policies that it might result in are, single family homes that are sized for families being upzoned and then getting, like I said, turned into a triplex, which, okay, fine. On paper looks great. You took one thing and you made it into three, but in reality, you took a house that fit a family and you made it three, efficiency units. Well, all of a sudden you made it so either a family has to squeeze into an efficiency unit, which isn't beneficial to anybody, or you just displaced a family. And so when we talk about displacement, we have to look at how the policies they're proposing actually play out, and will they result in displacing people? So it's that automatic density equals affordability, which I have yet to see a study actually prove that to be the case. And if you're going to push that as an agenda, how do you make sure that the affordable, denser housing you're creating isn't just, quite frankly, let's say this happens, let's just say that it somehow they have this awesome, denser, more affordable housing type that ends up plopping all over your county, right? And somehow there's also awesome jobs to go with it. What's to say that those units are going to go to people who are currently identified as being in need in this plan? Or is it going to attract a bunch of people to then move and drive up housing costs again? It's not a fixed equation. There can always be new numbers added. So how do you actually make sure this is meeting the needs of the people who really need it, as opposed to just providing cheaper housing to people who could have afforded it anyway? Does that make sense? Am I tracking that at all? Let's see. Okay, so boost financial incentives, or provide financial incentives to boost housing production for market rate and affordable housing, especially near transit, blah, blah, blah. So it's always to developers, it seems. Like, at no point do I really see them saying, you know what, we went and talked to, you know, there's this magical group of people that are supposedly being most served by this plan. But I don't see them saying, we're going to give incentives financially to those people. We're going to provide them with, you know, whether it's maybe subsidies so they can rent in other areas of your county that they maybe can't afford to get in now, or we're going to give them down payment assistance so they can actually, you know, have home ownership, or we're going to create some sort of property tax freeze, or at least stabilization for people who lived in a community longer than a certain number of years, whether they're renters or owners, to prevent displacement, because it'll incentivize landlords to keep those tenants because their property taxes won't be going up as much, and it'll incentivize people who live in their homes to be able to afford to stay because they won't get priced out when, you know, a bunch of people move in and drive up the housing price, which then drives up the comps and their assessed value. Are there things like that that they can do that actually directly target the people that they claim this is about, as opposed to just paying a developer and then doing a bunch of weird financial back and forth, where ultimately we don't really see a big benefit to the end user? You know, when we got rid of parking minimums, the whole thing was the cost of surface parking is about 25 grand a stall. The cost of structured parking is about 50 grand a stall. If we get rid of parking, that'll reduce those units by that amount. And when we got rid of parking, we didn't really see any reduction in the cost. We just gave away 25 and 50 grand per unit to a developer for nothing. Yay, cheaper cost for you that didn't get transferred onto the final occupants at all. So I'm always like questioning when we say financial incentives, you know, who's at the table crafting this policy? Odds are developers, you know. So you have to like ask yourself, who's there actually going, what actually works? Like if our goals really are anti-displacement or stabilization, or, you know, deconcentrating poverty, what does that mean? And what would that actually look like? What are the outcomes we want to see? And how do we craft policy to support that? Because that's the other thing too, like some of this that I was reading, I looked at those maps, and they had a metric they were looking at to see if they were successful. And one was, let me see if I can find it. One was the number of low-income households lost in a census tract over a period of time. And in parentheses, they had displacement. And I found this interesting because, okay, on a hunch, you might guess that that is going to be a sign of displacement. But I would hope aspirationally their goal is to actually lift people out of poverty to where people won't necessarily be displaced, but might have more of a higher income level in their household. So they might not be considered a low income household anymore, but they might still want to reside in the community that they're familiar with if it's their choice, right? But the automatic assumption, literally in writing, is that that equals displacement. And it might, I mean, and it very easily could, right? I mean, that's a very reasonable outcome. But at the same time, I would hope that this plan is aspirational enough to say we are creating stable communities with good living wage jobs that provide people the opportunities and the employment to actually live the lives they want, right? And that would mean that you don't have to leave your community if you don't want to, but you also aren't resigned to be low income if you want to stay. Like the problem we've had historically with redlining and racial covenants is that it denied people choice, right? And I worry that some of these policies, even though they're not, you know, redlining and they're not racial covenants, they're almost redundant outcomes. It's still denying people choice because we're still saying certain things, right? So I think we need to think about again what the goals are. And when I looked actually through the actual plan, they had a section after each chapter called, let me see if I can find their section here. How do we evaluate progress? And I was wondering what they were going to, so it has a bunch of data, which is really fascinating. The types of data they want to collect are really fascinating. They don't have the data yet. But I wondered, well, just these things alone don't necessarily mean progress. Like some of this could mean the opposite of progress. So I was kind of waiting for that other section to say, if we see this, for example, it might indicate this, that we're successful in this way. But if we see the data in this area do this, it might be an indication of this other thing. So I kind of am curious because it seems like they're doing a lot of correlations, but assuming they're causation assumptions, I would be curious, like car ownership levels, for example. Like that's a big thing that appears to be what they're hanging their environmental hat on, and commute times and all that stuff. And it mentions one thing at some point specifically about trades professionals and how it's a success if they cut down on their commute distance. And it's so bizarre because it seems to me so simplistic to imply that the only reason people live out in the boonies is because they can't afford to live, in the core or whatever. And people have a variety of reasons for living where they live, right? Like, I don't think all of us are the same. I don't think all of you on this call aspire to live in the exact same location and housing type and proximity to work as one another, right? Like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe people on the East Coast are different, but here in the Midwest, we all have differences, right? And that's not a bad thing. I think that the problem is they're assigning too much value to that. Instead of saying we want to cut greenhouse emissions, for example, which is great. We definitely should. This is not an anti-environmentalistic message at all. But the assumption seems to be made, number one, that people have these cars and they drive a long way. So if we give them an option for an apartment nearby, they'll choose that. Well, I got to say, I work with a lot of, electricians and plumbers and pipe fitters and carpenters, and they live out where they want to live. And usually it's because they have a truck and a garage and they work on stuff in their free time for fun and blah, blah, blah. They won't live in the city if I paid them to. Now, that's a universal statement. Obviously, there are plumbers and carpenters and electricians who would, but in general, just creating something closer doesn't mean that that's a choice they want to make. So that's kind of a really big assumption. The second is that people drive because they have to, or because they want to. So if you cut out that option, they'll be fine. And the thing that we need to remember, especially when we're talking about we're getting rid of parking, is that many times people drive in urban areas, even though it's a city, because they have to, right? So, I always say, like, their distance that they mentioned at one point was within 1 mile of a transit corridor. Okay, so envision for a second that you are, a single mom with 3 kids, and you work an off-hour shift, but your kid goes to daycare over here and your other kid goes to school over there, and you have to get groceries. Do you think a bus is going to get that all done without eating up any possible moment of free time you're going to have in the evening to actually see your children? I mean, the commute alone, unless you have a really, really, really robust public transit system, where pretty much necessitates that you have a car. And if you get rid of parking, it doesn't mean that Jane Doe all of a sudden will go, oh, I guess I don't need a car. It'll just mean she has to walk a number of blocks with kids in tow, trying to carry groceries just to survive. And that's pretty darn harsh, considering in the wealthier areas, odds are they will build a garage or a parking space, whether one is required or not. So it's an amenity. So all of a sudden you took something for people that might not even need it, and they're going to have it anyway. And you've removed the possibility for people that really need it just as a survival tool. So I don't want to necessarily demonize people who own cars, because in some areas, cars are a tool to get what you need. I mean, I know when we had the civil unrest in our city, my quadrant of the city had no grocery stores and no pharmacies because things got shut down and vandalized. And so people with vehicles had to go and get things to bring back for all the people who relied on public transit, because public transit was also shut down. Like, when we talk about being a food desert, it was literally people needed food, and the only way to get it was cars. And so I don't mean to say like cars are our savior, but I'm just saying it seems as though if we're going to talk about the future of our cities and what it looks like, if we're really concerned about greenhouse gases, we should be going, well, then let's push e-vehicle infrastructure and a means for people to charge them at their homes as much as possible, or, recharge them in streets. I mean, there's a million things we can do that have nothing to do with cars and everything to do with reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. And if that means we almost need to make e-vehicles more affordable or available to communities like this until we can bridge that gap, maybe that's a method of doing it. But just equating that somehow getting rid of parking and roads is somehow some big environmental boon, it just makes it harder for people to get what they need to do, because our infrastructure and our way of life is already around this system, right? Like, we don't have transit like they do in Europe, where you could literally travel to America for, let's say this summer. I mean, I've never done this, but people do this, go to Europe, backpack around, get around just fine. Can you imagine trying to get around this country all summer without any vehicle, you wouldn't get very far, right? We just don't have that kind of infrastructure here, and we're not there yet. And by the time we do, I bet gas powered automobiles will be the way of, you know, horse and buggy, right? So I don't think I think it's a red herring to pin everything on the automobile, because the automobile is changing, and whether it becomes a shared vehicle, you know, or not, it's an e-vehicle that we can hopefully have renewable energy to power. So I think that the reliance of this plan on the car as being the big bad boogeyman is a little bit disingenuous, or at least short-sighted. I mean, it needs to be better and bigger. A lot of missing middle stuff. They have a question: proportion and range. Oh, proportion of missing middle housing units and units compared to multifamily units. And the range of house prices are there metrics for assessing the success or failure of the policies. I'm not sure what the presence of missing middle units necessarily has to do with the outcome of this policy. I think that they're missing the forest for the trees. They've assumed that this presence means that we've equaled affordability. I would say the metric they need to look at is, gee, is housing more affordable? Is housing more available? Are people being displaced less? Are people having more choice in where they want to live? Are people getting higher paying jobs? Things that actually matter, rather than the things they should be using as perhaps an indicator of something. They're assuming that that in and of itself indicates that the goal has been met. I mean, you could have a ton more missing middle units and still not have housing affordability. But if that's your metric for measuring success, you'll think you've succeeded. And in reality, you might not have done anything, because there's nothing that says more units equals affordability. And that's the problem, is this plan appears to approach this as a foregone conclusion. Same thing, yeah, greenhouse gas emissions from residential buildings and transportation per capita. Again, like so here's the thing: if you want to make buildings greener, you know, there's improved energy codes you can require of all new construction. Boom, right off the bat, all new buildings, super green, do it, whatever. And you can make it so everyday people, maybe there's grants or funding available so they can insulate their homes, insulate their roofs, add solar panels. The last thing you should be doing is giving them money toward windows when 90% of a wall is where the energy loss occurs, not the little 10% that's glass. So if anything, insulate the daylights out of people's houses. Give them reasons where they can stay in their house because the energy costs are lower. Those kind of things make a difference to people, not just assuming it's all about cars. And that's sad. This is all the metrics. Housing units proximate to transit routes and job centers. That's interesting, but it doesn't tell you anything about whether it's more affordable. I think a lot of people in Manhattan live really close to transit routes and job centers, and yet I could never afford to live there. So I don't think that in of itself tells about a plan's success. Number of affordable units by type. Again, they mean like multifamily versus single family. I think they need to look at your actual demographic data of your county and assess what the real needs are for affordable housing. Are they micro units? Are they ADU type units? Are they 3-bedroom units? Are they 5-bedroom units? I was really astonished. There was a grid in here, a graph somewhere that talked about number of bedrooms per building occupant. And I was actually really surprised at the number of one-person households who lived in 5+ bedroom houses. I was like, whoa, that's kind of surprising. So I kind of want to know more about that study, but deeply affordable. Okay. They have a comment here about monitoring the number of homeless in the county and changes in affordable units. And I guess the one thing that I felt like this policy or this plan or set of policies was missing in regard to that was that it seemed to say, well, here, exactly. It says housing types like personal living quarters and micro units. And then it had a different mention about SROs. And I think what's lacking is any sort of bar to say, you know, housing doesn't have to be the same for everybody, and people are unhoused, and what do we do about that? But I think before you rush to a solution, you need to define what's the bare minimum we as a society are willing to say means living in dignity. I get that people have different income levels, and some people are afforded the opportunity to live in really opulent surroundings and others are not. But I don't think that means that anything is better than nothing. I think that there needs to be a bare minimum of what we accept as a society for members of our society. And I did not see here was that, but instead I saw, again, personal living quarters and micro units. So we as a society at some point made some decision in a lot of people's zoning codes that the minimum unit size of something should be X many square feet. Now, for some people, it's 500 square feet. For some people, it's 350 square feet. For some, it's 250 square feet, right? And we have different things when it's congregate living or some sort of supportive housing that allows for more dense things. But in general, at some point in many areas of our country, we decided, well, in general, per a person, if you were in a box, which you had to live in, what's the size that wouldn't make you lose your mind? What's enough to give you enough so your needs are met, so you can buy enough food so you don't have to get on the bus every day to get it and have your life eaten away by sitting in traffic? What's enough so you can buy something on sale and have it? What's enough so you can have clothes to last for different seasons? You can store it and not have to buy new clothes every season. What are those things that give you enough room to store things so that way you can reuse them instead of not having room for them? And at some point we decided, there's a minimum amount required. I see stuff getting chipped away, and this plan doesn't mention a square footage, but I do see things getting chipped away where it's almost warehousing of people. It's saying, well, you were homeless and now you live in this tiny little, even box in a warehouse. And there we've housed you. And I just think that, and this is my own personal, maybe other people don't think that homeless individuals deserve to live in actual houses or buildings, but I kind of think we need to actually decide that and set that as a minimum so we know what to expect, because at some point we just keep chipping away at it till it's not a quality place. And actually that's really interesting, is with all of the affordable housing dollars that we allocate in this government right now, so much of it has to go toward restoration of old housing that we did, because when we build affordable housing, we tend to use cheap materials because we want it to be cheap to build. And so instead of investing in quality materials that last, we're now stuck paying for them time and time over because we didn't just make the investment up front. So again, penny wise, pound foolish kind of thing. And I feel like it's the same thing here. We just it's a race to the bottom instead of just deciding, it's a big price tag to do this, where we can actually take care of our fellow citizens. What does that look like? What would it take? And what do we need to do to get there? It's kind of dancing around it and being like, oh, we can just make a bunch of units. 100 people will live in a former Kmart. It'll be great. We just need to decide. And I don't know what this means, but I do not see anything that says pretty much that there's a minimum level that we'll be willing to accept. Like, it can't be any smaller. This can't be any, any more compromise. So there's that. Encourage adequate supply of affordable housing through the county. It's a awareness of a need for sustainable housing. Yep, again, but green does not always equal new. Oh, I saw, okay, this kind of surprised me. I saw that the Council of Governments housing goals from 2019, the third one was that at least 75% of new housing should be affordable to low and middle income households. And I was amazed. 75% is really impressive. I mean, that's quite the goal. I don't know how you'll get there. I really don't. Like, it seems like a really, really aspirational goal, but it seems as though it's not necessarily a housing issue as much as what's happening that people can't afford 75% of new housing. I mean, when we we incorporated inclusionary zoning into our housing policy here in Minneapolis, and we got nowhere near 20% even, much less 75%, because oftentimes we use market rate and above market rate housing to subsidize the affordable units. So I'm kind of wondering how they do it, only using 25% to subsidize it. So I was just like, wow, I kind of want to learn more about this. Let's see, the planning board was supportive of the Thrive map since it wasn't adopted. That makes you wonder if they don't want you to see the map. Although I think it's beneficial if you were able to see a map saying if there are actually defined goals of what you want it to look like X many units, then let's see what some options of what that might look like so we can actually, so anyway, I just think we need to think about it as all. I think that you're going to end up with a bunch of crap housing that you're going to have to try and maintain otherwise. Okay, then this seemed a little bit odd to me. They said they're supportive of a planning board approved pattern book for the creation of new attainable housing. But then in a different chapter, they talked about the importance of design, emphasis on design and art. And I found that really, really strange, unless they're trying to have a plan book that actually is designed by architects and almost curated and priced out, which could be impressive, but most plan books I see are usually done by, like, they have, I mean, it's not, they're not that super. So I'm just curious what that's about. Gosh, trees, biking, walking. Oh, that's the other thing. Just real quick here, it stuck out to me is just that there's a mention of aging in place and design for people with disabilities. But I didn't really see any policy that indicated anything about it other than density. So in general, you know, when I think about aging in place, I just wondered what their policies would do to support that, because a lot of this about, you know, the 15-minute complete city, I think we need to think about what that means for somebody with mobility issues, because, you know, getting rid of cars is fine. Not fine, but it's something achievable if you're super young and fit, or even if you're not young and you're just super fit, good for you. But if you have a mobility issue, or if you have an elder person in your life that you have to assist in getting to appointments and whatnot, we have found a lot of barriers to being able to access that in communities, because we don't allow places to even drop people off by a front door to a restaurant, or there's no parking, so you can take them to, you know, the eye doctor, or the, you know, out and about, or even to a shop. Like, it's all assuming you can bike and walk, you know, miles, when we have a really aging population that isn't necessarily able to literally physically do that. So I think we need to make sure that we're designing cities for all, and not just for fit people that like bicycling everywhere, because not everybody does. I don't know. I'm just rambling at this point. So, I mean, I guess I should open this up for some questions, because I think I've just like made notes to myself, and I have all these little post-it notes all over this PDF, and it's probably just kind of a little bit confusing and not quite the best presentation. So my apologies. But I just kind of wanted to touch on a few things that stuck out to me that I was a little bit surprised about.
Well, thank you. We'll take some questions now. Kathleen, you've had your hand up for a while, so why don't you go first? You're muted, Kathleen. And then Kathleen Sammy.
I'm sorry, Alan.
Okay, I can hear.
Okay, we're doing Kathleen Woody first. Go ahead, Kathleen.
All right, what you're talking about is about 90% of my platform, because I think the housing has to be retrofitted and refurbished rather than torn down. What are you doing as far as the assets when you tear down a third of your housing in a large county like this? Financially it's impossible. And for people who are handicapped, I have a severely autistic son who was a eloper. That means he ran, and they used to do studies on the eloper of the gazelle of Silver Spring. The only way you could possibly go out was in a car. I have a brother who is elderly, and he is a polio survivor. And the reason he's able to walk around and do stuff in life is because he has a car. So to take away parking is totally discriminatory against handicapped and aged. And it's mean and cruel to families. Also, footpaths are a much better way to deal with walking around than the bicycles. It's a small percentage of your population that can use bicycles, but everybody can use a baby carriage and walk around. So what are your opinions on that? And did anybody fight those things in your jurisdiction?
Yeah, I mean, we discussed getting rid of parking. It started with a proposal that said we'll get rid of it because it'll within a certain proximity to transit corridors, and then that'll be a way to create affordable housing, because all these developers will then pass the savings on to the resident, which so that got approved, even though I said, well, really, you know, this is questionable and bus routes change. And then we didn't see any savings passed on to anybody. The housing didn't get $25,000 to $50,000 a unit cheaper at all. And one of the things we did see was, even in the areas where we in our zoning prohibited curb cuts, extra curb cuts. Some of the members of the planning commission and I, we would see senior centers come in and they would propose these little porte cocheres to pull in with a car under a covered opening to escort a senior citizen to and from like the car to get to doctor's appointments, to go to eat or get their hair done or whatever. And some of the members fought against it, saying we don't want curb cuts. We're trying to basically be anti-car. And we succeeded in allowing them in a few places because we said there is a need. Like if you have a parent who has mobility issues or even just moves slower back. I mean, as you age, you just, I mean, I know I'm aching lately. They need time to get somewhere and they shouldn't get drenched in the process. They shouldn't have to slip on ice. We get a lot of ice and snow here in the winter. Having a curb cut to accommodate that doesn't make the world any less safe or green. It just makes it more inclusive so people can actually, again, that it's about aging in place, so they can stay an active part of a community instead of being blocked off somewhere where, you know, they're not part of our society. And that's, so I completely agree on that regard.
We're going to ask people to try to indicate that they want to raise a question, but ask a question by using the raise hand function, which is on your screen under reactions. There's a raise hand button, and that'll help us. Jackie Bocco, we hope, is going to help us call on people. RJ, please, you're next on my screen. RJ.
Yeah, I just wanted to get on the video. There we go. Okay. Great, thank you so much. And it's been suggested that you be nominated for our planning board because we need you. And I totally agree. So I have a question. You said something really important that really needs emphasis, which is that the guiding document, the master plan, this so-called Thrive 2050, needs to include safeguards.
Yeah.
In order that the zoning that follows it doesn't wipe out all the things that we really want to protect. So right now, it appears to me that the Thrive 2050 document is a by right proposal, you know, and I'm thinking that by right obviates the ability to include safeguards. And so I wanted to understand how to navigate that.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. So I would say, I don't know if I would call it a by right, but I would say it opens the floodgates because it's saying, here's the types of policies that we want. And based on the way they've interpreted them already as saying how they're saying, well, to get that goal, we need to do X, Y, and Z. It's only reasonable to assume that any following updates to actual zoning code and statute will reflect their version of how to achieve that goal without any required metrics that actually relate to the goal. They have things that they assume are indicators of that goal, but I didn't see any data actually proving that, like I said, density equals affordability. There's no data that actually shows that. I haven't seen it anywhere at all, like not anything anywhere. So, but operating under that, then you would say, oh, then we're going to measure the number of units that's per acre, therefore that's increased density. If we increase density, we've done it. And actually, how do you define what metrics are we want? You want increased affordability. Okay, what does that mean? Does it mean lower rental rates? Does it mean lower mortgage payments? Does it mean lower energy costs? Like, what is the actual way you define more affordable housing for people, right? Or is it even just the for sale price of houses, right? Like, those are the actual goals, right? Like, define how they need to define what that looks like at the end point. And then work backward from there instead of just relying on how they've interpreted it and measuring that interpretation, because that interpretation might have nothing to do with the actual outcomes they're trying to achieve. It's just based on an assumption. So, yeah.
But safeguards you've talked about in the past, like you know, safeguards with owner occupancy,
yeah,
safeguards regard to tree canopy, prevent real estate developer exploitation, rising property taxes, from those kinds of safeguards. I just, you know, I'm just wondering how to get them in a document if this, you know, because
it's really hard. It's hard here because the policy documents like this, these guiding visions they're deliberately vague because they're aspirational, and that's their whole point, right? The problem is when they're written in a way that's supporting predetermined policy outcomes already. So in some of this, I suspect that that's what I don't know for sure. I don't know who wrote this, but a lot of it seems to align so closely with policy that I've seen. It's almost uncanny to write. I'm like, I can't believe they don't already have some zoning codes updates waiting in the wings. This won't take much to implement in terms of updating the zoning code to allow it. So I think you almost need safeguards, for example, that say, that rely on metrics that have direct connections to the stated outcomes. And I think this plan, like the ones, at least what I saw, I can't say that I read every sentence and analyzed it ad nauseum, didn't actually define what attainable housing looks like, or affordable housing, or whatever terms they're using. Like, what is that? Like I said, what does it actually mean? Like, we can talk and be warm and fuzzy about it being, attainable and sustainable and, blah, blah, blah. And, do reduce transit times and, blah, 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 per capita greenhouse gas emissions. But what exactly are we trying to get to? If it is a more affordable housing, define what that means. Not like, oh, such and such by 30% AMI or whatever. But no, to everyone that you're talking about in this plan, what does that mean? In 5 years, what impact should we expect? How will we know that impact has actually been achieved? Not because we measured units per acre, or how many cars are off the road, or how narrow our streets got, or how fewer parking spaces there are, but in terms of actually meeting the goal. The whole purpose of all those policies is for a larger goal. What is that goal? And it doesn't explicitly say that anywhere that I saw. I mean, if somebody sees it, let me know, because maybe I just missed it. It's been a long, long summer, but I didn't see it. And that's the thing that everyone's missing is they've almost put the cart ahead of the horse. They have these ideas, they want to implement them, and they'll have all these great outcomes. Instead of saying, here's the outcomes we want, how do we create policy to implement them?
Okay.
Okay, our next question from Leanne Tobias, if you would unmute, please.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Hi there. There are two things that I have thought about this policy, and I'm wondering if you have seen, Alissa, anything along these lines in Minneapolis or in the other upzoning discussions that you have been party to, or have read about or witnessed. And one issue in this plan is, on the one hand, there is some logic in emphasizing market rate development, which this plan does.
Mm-hmm.
But in the United States, market rate development and affordable housing are produced through very different paths. And I don't think that's dealt with. The other issue that I have is I have heard members of our one member at least of our county council saying that the changes that the pandemic has wrought in the use of the built environment are not relevant to this plan, and this plan need not take the impact of the pandemic into account. I personally would not agree with that. And I think the pandemic provides an opportunity in that office space is going to be increasingly underutilized, particularly in Class B or secondary office markets, which describe quite a few of those in Montgomery County. And that perhaps makes an opportunity for adaptive reuse, converting office to residential. But again, this plan disregards that entirely. And I'm just wondering if these issues are coming up elsewhere.
Well, I think you're completely right. I mean, if they don't think that the pandemic is something they need to adjust to, I think it's a little foolish, because I mean, over history, these kinds of great, I don't want to say things, large things like this have had a big impact on how we do things. So before the pandemic, it was constantly, one room for everything, one big open house, or, we're going to downsize, or, blah, 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 all these efficiency units. And I have to say, I'm an architect, so I'm mainly hearing what the design world is, learning and knowing about, and what clients are asking for. And let me tell you, the open floor plan from anyone who had to have their kid at home trying to go to distance learning is dead for them, because it was awful. I mean, I had children at home for distance learning, and let me tell you, I have never been more grateful for separate rooms with doors in my life, right? So I don't know how people think that families can live in a open floor plan, 1-bedroom efficiency if you are a parent of 2 or 3 children who has to learn remotely. Now, having said that, it has changed the way we live. Whether people are finding now that rural areas are getting more highly populated again because of people who are enabled to work remotely. They now can afford to live in lots of places now that before they would never have dreamed of moving to, because they had to have their high-paying job. Well, they're bringing that money into rural areas now because that's where they've moved, and they can keep that job with the higher income in an area with a much lower cost of living. So it's reshaping who's living where and why. And it also means that our jobs aren't necessarily going to be right where we live. Now, at the same time, we do have need for jobs right where we live, because we do have needs that are met through physical interaction. But it's no longer universal. It's no longer such a clear cut. If you have a job, you go to a job, you do your job, you go home every night. I mean, it's reshaped everything. And also it's reshaped how we think about spaces, whether it's like live work spaces or intergenerational spaces, people dealing with childcare, people opting not to have children now because of the changing economic environment we're in. There's a lot of changes that are that these big kind of things that we all go through impact. And just like, the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, different things happen historically, wars, we adjust how we live in response to that. So I think if they're ignoring that, they're being really foolish. At the same time, we saw rising gas prices. People were complaining all summer about it. Just because something happens like that doesn't mean people necessarily opt to change their behavior to buy, for example, more energy efficient, fuel efficient vehicles. So we have to also look at, sometimes humans are going to do what they do regardless of whether there's a common sense solution in front of them or not. So we can't design the urban environment assuming that if we just design something common sense, everyone will want it, because in the end of the day, everyone is different, and the things that drive one person are not the things that drive another. And the things where some people really thrive in multifamily environments, they're very maybe extroverted people. Other people will not do so well mentally and emotionally. And we're trying to put more of an emphasis on mental health concerns now in our society. So I don't think we can keep promoting a one size fits all solution. I think we need to find ways for different people to live and work and play together in different ways that doesn't presume that we all have to live the same way. Because I can guarantee you, half of you would probably go nuts living the way I live, and vice versa. So it just means we need to accept people being different, and also understand that these things do shape our environment, whether we want them to or not. And the whole commuting thing isn't necessarily the be all end all for what their whole goal is. Because again, it's about creating choice, not forcing people to live one way.
What about just the notion of affordable housing and market rate housing being created on different tracks?
Oh, well, that's a no-brainer right there. I mean, gosh, seeing how we had a project come through in Minneapolis right around, well, maybe my last year or two on the planning commission. And it was a market rate building, very high and expensive, on the intersection of 2 major transit routes. So literally on a corner, one street was super awesome transit, the other street was super awesome transit, lots of amenities around, like restaurants and stores and, theater, and, everything was there. And they had, I think, I want to say it was close to 2 stalls per unit for structured, covered, indoor, temperature controlled parking. Okay. And at the same time, you go a couple miles north and you'll have a similar size building with none of the amenities. Like, you're talking, I don't even know if they got a concrete patio with a picnic table out back, and not even 2 stalls to have visitor parking. So they're funded different. Affordable housing is funded differently. So if you don't require it, they're not gonna do it. They're not going to invest in something that's an amenity if they don't have to. It's what's the cheapest window? What's the cheapest siding? What's the cheapest design? What's the cheapest architecture firm? Then architect firms probably like, what's our cheapest designers? I mean, there's a whole like waterfall of that goes into, and I don't want to disparage affordable housing, but honestly, I have reviewed over 5,000 land use applications in my time on the planning commission. And at this point, you could show me a slideshow of housing, and I will tell you without knowing anything about it, whether it's affordable housing or not, because there are key tells, and they're physically notably different. And whether normal people, by normal people, I mean non-nerdy architects like me, realize it or not, subconsciously they do. We all know the difference between crappy, undesirable housing and not crappy housing, right? I mean, we're innately drawn to things that appeal to human beings living in it, not just shoving people into regimented spaces. Look at which places have balconies even. I mean, real usable ones, not fake ones. They're funded differently. They are designed differently. They're built differently. They're not the same animal at all. So I always think you'd be better spent exploring how to do that. And also, why in general affordable housing, especially multifamily, is built where the land is cheapest, right? So that means further concentrating poverty in areas that already have concentrations of poverty, right? Areas with the least jobs, the highest levels of crime, the worst health disparities, the worst usually schools, the worst access to transit and amenities, less parkland, less green space, less jobs. I mean, that's where we put it. And why would we put housing for people most in need of those things in the areas that least have them? Why? Because the land was cheap. I mean, right there and in there, they should look at the plan and go, you aren't allowed to put any of that here. We're going to subsidize for you to put in these other areas because that's where the jobs are. That's where the schools are. And we need to give people choices so they can opt to stay in a community or they can opt to leave it. But right now they can't have that choice because there isn't a choice. There's no choice for them to be able to leave because they can't afford to live anywhere else. So I know I'm going off on a tangent now, but.
Okay. I don't think we'll be able to have follow-up questions. So let's go to our next question, which is from former Minneapolis residents Carol Barth and Jim Zepp. If you want to unmute, please, and ask your question. We cannot hear you. We cannot hear you. Carol and Jim, we cannot hear you. Even though it says you're not muted, we cannot hear you.
Turn up their volume.
Oh, wait, that's somebody else.
Carol and Jim, why don't you put your question in the chat if you can do that, and we'll go on to Eric Cathcart.
Alissa, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and the really valuable insights that you're giving us. And I really want to thank you for your investing this much time with us. Regarding upzoning and policy, do you think that there's a possible correlation and unintended consequence with the number of increased vacant homes within a community when we're talking about upzoning, the possibility of upzoning? In my community, we're just really starting to see a lot of more vacant homes than in memory. We're a mature community about a mile away from the DC line. So we are within the zone. We are within the lens of being absolutely desirable, but we don't have a vacancy tax. So we can't really motivate our landlords or the property owners to either rent or sell. And we have no problem with people buying homes here, but there's where's the policy when it's where is it?
So I think that's really interesting because one of the things that we initially, when this got brought up in my neck of the woods, that what I was concerned about was, would universal upzoning lead toward just increased investor gobbling up the land and the properties and the houses, because they could speculate that either they could either control a larger share of the market, or worst case, they could slice and dice it and have more units and rent those units out. I think we saw some shocking statistics about the number of house sales that got bought by absentee investors in our neck of the woods. The most, I should say, I live in the area of the quadrant of our city that's most economically disadvantaged. So I think at some point it was like, I want to say it was over 50% of house sales were being gobbled up by out-of-state investors, investment portfolios essentially. And they could afford to just sit on them and let them sit empty because they own such a stake in the community that they've essentially controlled the market. So it wasn't like, oh, there's all these more units meant affordability. More units held by absentee investors meant that they could control how much it was priced for. And it didn't matter that supply and demand were in effect, because they were like, no, I don't care. I'm going to sit on this and I'll write off any losses at the end of my year and blah, blah, blah. I mean, in reality, I think the speculative value of it, not the actuality. I don't think we legally so let me see. We universally upzoned the entire city to be triplex possible. A couple years ago, and COVID really messes with my sense of time. Anyway, I think we've had less than 100 units get generated from that triplex upzoning. So I think it's safe to say, after also at the same time knowing that housing prices have only continued to go on up, that it has had zero impact on making anything more affordable. All it did was make housing costs less affordable, because people would speculate that they could get more value for their dollar if they needed to. If they couldn't rent something as a single family home, they would just slice and dice it and rent it then as a duplex or a triplex or whatever they want to do, or even possibly in the future as a boarding house, because SROs are now on the table again as a discussion point. So I think instead of giving investors the opportunity to speculatively exploit a community, we should be kind of ratcheting down and saying, this doesn't appear to deliver any of the goals. Again, the goals we talked about, affordable housing, what does that look like? It didn't make housing more affordable. Therefore, I would say it didn't really accomplish the goals. So maybe we shouldn't necessarily rely on this as being our Hail Mary, because it didn't really produce anything, but it did result in a lot of homes being gobbled up by people who have no intention of trying to make housing affordable or even available. And you're right, having no vacancy tax. I mean, stuff sits regardless. And a lot of times, even if we have those things, good luck enforcing them. I mean, we have slumlords that have so many numerous violations about things and yet nothing. So it's one of those Pandora's boxes. Like, what do you do now, right? Like, you just got to wait for them to all go into mass foreclosure in a few years during our next housing recession, and then hope that the next person that gobbles them up has a little more ethical a compass in them. I don't know.
Okay, Jim and Carol, are you back on? Are you able to speak? Nope, okay. We're going on to Ira Unger then, if you want to unmute and ask your question, Ira.
Hi, thanks. Anyway, thanks again for this terrific talk. It's just such a pleasure. I wanted to emphasize something that you said earlier, which is that the problem is very complex, and there's just many factors going into it, and that we live like Minneapolis, in a very progressive area where progressive rhetoric is easy, but the solutions are so hard. And so one thing I wanted to ask you is what you might suggest in terms of being able to move the complexity into the public square, into the realm of discourse, to get out of just a single progressive issue and then just hammering at that, rather than really dealing with all the repercussions. And the other thing I wanted to mention, probably related to that, is I think it's so important what you said about minimum standards, and what affords dignity to people, whatever their income. And if you could talk about maybe some more metrics for those minimum standards, like the balance between density and green space, something like that.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm trying to think back to what your first question was, because I was kind of
the complexity versus the progressive rhetoric.
Got it. So okay, so that one, I think that all boils down to somehow holding those in a position of power crafting this accountable. a lot of the people that were pushing ours have moved on to bigger, greener, more lucrative pastures. So, and who cares, the fallout of what they've left in their wake doesn't matter, because all the talking points and articles that got written, which by the way, we as a city paid for that marketing, are all the narrative that they use to get to the next level. I think having some level of accountability where you actually tie them to those real goals, not these metrics that they've skewed to somehow be stand-ins for the real goals, but actually getting them to commit in writing about what accomplishing the goals looks like, and then getting their name attached to that being measured and saying, okay, Bob Jones, you said that this policy would create this affordable outcome, specifically this. We'll have 10% less unhoused people. We will have, I don't know, whatever, X percentage increase in standard of living, whatever it is, something concrete, or even a range, It'd be this to this, give me the bare bottom minimum of what you think will happen based on this, since you seem so certain that this policy is the thing. And then at that, and by what time, by what year, in 2 years, and 5 years, and 20 years, come on. So, and then ultimately then going back and saying, okay, Bob Jones, it is now, 2028, it's been 5 years, and that did not happen. And it did not happen by a little, it probably not happened by a lot. So at that point, maybe there's a failsafe. If this does not happen within the time frame you have told us, then those policies automatically expire, or something to that effect. I mean, you got to hedge that a little though, because you also don't want it where people are playing the market going, well, I just have to hold out this long against this really, otherwise would be good policy. You want to make sure you're not shooting yourself in the foot with that one. But you need to actually have a way of then saying, okay, you said this would be the outcome based on, I would only assume they've spent a ton of money on staffing and studies and whatever to craft this document, probably in consultants who wrote it up and had all the fancy buzzword, wordsmithing and all that fun stuff. That was a lot of money. Hopefully some thought went into actually the difficult part of it, and then say, look, we are going to hold you. You might think that this is no big deal, you'll just move on to the next thing, but this will forever be attached to your name as the thing you did that either benefited us or didn't. So you better be extra certain that if you are going to promote these policies, that they will actually achieve the outcomes that you are saying they will, because people's lives are on the line here. This is not something where people magically get 5 years of their life back if you made them live in poverty for that much longer, or instituted policies that displaced that many more. I mean, this is real stuff. These are people's lives. So if you are going to commit to this, you better have given it a great deal of thought into the complexities around it. And if you suddenly aren't so certain, you got to get certain. I think it's a matter of holding actual people accountable. City in general is too vague. So someone gets mad at the city, big whoop, they get mad at the city every day. A dog's barking, some tree fell on their fence, God knows what. That's going to blow over, right? You need to actually make sure people know. I want to know the real outcomes. I want to know when I can expect to see them. And I want you to know that your face is going to be the face of that. So it better be good. And you know what, if it is good, let's say we're all wrong. Let's say this is really a silver bullet that solves everything, and it's, you guys get to live in utopia. Great. Then Bob Jones's face will be the face of this successful movement. But I bet you Bob Jones will think twice if he knows that his face will be associated with something that hasn't really been thought through. I guess maybe I kind of like to think about that in the future. As for things about what kind of amenities or spaces make for people to are suitable for people to live in dignity, I think it comes down to the people's needs. I think at one point in the document, it cites conversion of old commercial spaces and shopping malls and that kind of thing. I think they need to actually dig into that a little deeper, because they're starting to get to something. When we think about, when I think back when I was a kid and we would visit my great grandma in a nursing home, what a depressing place. Really, what a horrible, I think about that now going, oh God, but that, pretty good compared to how her great grandma lived back when she was in her elder years, right? And now we have places like Jimmy Buffett has his own senior retirement community that has a Margaritaville bar in it and whatever. I think we need to start thinking about what needs different portions of our community have. And so, for example, shopping malls would be a completely ideal place for senior housing. You could literally convert them almost to an indoor mini town square with a clinic and a post office and restaurant. So families could visit with their loved ones and walk in a totally, snow-free environment. And actually have those benefits. So I think it depends on the needs of the people you're trying to and when it comes to homeless populations, I think it specifically needs to be, where can it be surrounded by support services that help keep them housed? You can't just shove people in a box and then say, there, you're done. There's needs people have that aren't being met. So how do we make sure that we spend the money once and then people have a better life instead of spending the money 50 times and nobody ever gets out of a cycle of poverty, right? So I think we need to actually dig into that. And I think access to green space is huge. I think access to education and healthcare and all those things that are larger than housing, but are related to housing, are really important. But it isn't just, making it rain for everybody. It's saying like, okay, maybe for this type of population, supportive housing is best. So it's a housing environment, and these are the specific needs they have for personal space versus stuff that they shouldn't have in personal space, versus, hey, this is, a family who's experiencing homelessness. If they can just get their feet under themselves, they can make it. Like, how do we set people up for success? And that means not shoving them in a 1-bedroom room, a mom and 4 kids. It's saying, okay, we have to create spaces that have a space for the kids to play and study and where she can, work or get a ride to work or have a bus to work or park her car to go to work, and maybe the grocery store nearby that's not a convenience store, those kinds of things. So I think it varies, and it's not, again, a one-size-fits-all solution. I think we have to actually use data is so available now. They need to use their data and be smarter about it instead of just throwing out vague suppositions about helping the people without understanding even who the people are. Like,
Do you have a
Ira, no
general-
follow-ups, please. Thank you, Ira.
No problem.
Liz Joyce? Sorry, Ira.
Yes, first of all, I wanted to note that because of your experience, you have identified with uncanny accuracy the huge black holes in this policy. You mentioned that there's got to be an under document that this is based on, that it is headed toward. And you're absolutely right. It is that there is the Thrive Plan, and there is also a companion so-called Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative, which includes all of the specific upzoning plans. And they are expected to follow with frightening speed after this plan is passed. This is the on-ramp to the zoning text amendments that the proponents of this plan want to pass. And very little of what you have identified as what needs to happen is in either plan. So this is why we are also deeply concerned about this. You mentioned, what's the map? Where's the map? One of the interesting things about this plan is that it is a change from a previously detailed map of the entire county, which, by the way, is 504 square miles. And one size fits all, as you mentioned, won't work. It doesn't adapt. And their idea is, well, we'll figure that out later after we pass the plan. And as you just said, accountability and a face to each suggested change is crucial. Otherwise, what's going to happen? And seniors, by the way, who are going to be 20 to 30% of the population, are mentioned in 4 times in this 150-page document. So that's an indication of just how well thought out it is. It is the growth map in the new plan has all these little zones in it. And what we're worried about is that the planners and their attorneys will say, oh, this zone is a growth zone, limited growth, and that means X, Y, and Z, and therefore we can do X, Y, and Z. And this is why we're so concerned, because it is kind of a house of mirrors. But to get to my question is, given that that's what we're dealing with, you mentioned safeguards. You've written so beautifully about what happened in Minneapolis with absentee investor landlords completely changing the landscape and closing out the opportunity for home ownership to so many people who would otherwise be buying homes. Do you have any idea of, as we face what these leaders want to do, what kind of safeguards we can propose to prevent this kind of like exponential catastrophe, from my point of view, that this could lead to if we don't do this right?
Well, I think I need to preface this by saying, I don't think density is bad. I don't think triplexes are the devil. However, I think that real estate exploitation is bad. And so I think if they really thought that having more density was the solution, they need to be mindful of who is controlling that density and who benefits from the equity from that density. So if this plan was saying, for example, we have, this many people, and I don't remember your percentages, but who are severely cost burdened households, they rent, it's eating up, I think their statistic was saying about 30% of income, but in Minneapolis, we say if it's over 50% of your income, you're severely cost burdened. And we have a huge significant population that is literally spending more than half their income on housing costs. And so if they had said in this plan, look, the answer is density, but it's not blanket density. It's density for people who actually need to kind of get a jump on the equitable nature of homeownership that so many other people got to enjoy historically that was denied to certain populations, right? So if they said, we're going to say, if you are someone who wants to own a home or own property, and you don't, or you do, or whatever, you are experiencing this level of housing costs that is astronomically disproportionate to your income. Maybe we'll allow you to do a triplex, like I suggested, and we'll help you afford to convince a bank to do that. Because I read actually somewhere in the document it proposes that as a tool. And I think if a bank won't give you a mortgage for a single family, reasonably sized little house, what would make the planners think that they would fork over the money for a person to build a duplex or a triplex? I mean, the gap in logic there is huge. If they're not going to take a chance on you for a 1,200 square foot bungalow, they're not going to take a chance on giving you a triplex that's, 4 times that size, right? They just won't. So it's saying, okay, we're going to set you up for success. Not only will you have a roof over your head because you'll live in one of the units, but you'll also be able to build equity and you'll have more security. So in these economic downturns that we exhibit or experience from year to year, things happen. You'll have income from renting to somebody and who lives in your community now because they're your neighbor to help you make it through that time. So you might not have a job yet that pays a ton of money, right? But you won't necessarily need to have that job to help cover your housing costs. So we can't control your income level, but we can help actually subsidize it through normal capitalistic, everything loves and democracy means, blah, blah, blah. Well, at the same time, providing more units for you to rent to people in your neighborhood. So that way you can stay if you want to stay or live wherever it is, and build up equity through this rental opportunity, which you're also inhabiting. So therefore it kind of is 2 birds, 1 stone kind of solution. The thing that we saw here, we didn't do that. We have all these investors flocking in and doing everything. And what we found is that in the last 5 years, every year, property taxes have gone up in the most disadvantaged communities higher than anywhere else in the city. We're talking 20 to 30% a year, every year for the last 5 years. In areas that, if you can contrast it to areas of the city that are our wealthiest areas, they actually saw a decrease in their property taxes. And it was solely driven by the fact that speculative investors drove up the cost of buying houses in this neighborhood or property in this neighborhood. So comps were higher. So they assessed people who've lived in their homes since before I existed are being priced out of their home because they can't afford the spikes in property taxes from just the fact that some jerk from Florida bought bungalow next to them and paid $350,000 or $450,000 for a house that maybe they paid $70,000 or $80,000 for back in the day. So all of a sudden they're going, well, oh my God, like, yeah, I have this asset, but it's not like I can cash it out necessarily. This is the one thing I can hand to my kids, or the one thing I've maintained through all these turbulent times in our community. And now I have to pay thousands of dollars to the city out of nowhere every year, more than I used to, because some guy just bought the place next to me. And you happen to think that because I have a similar sized house, It's absurd. So that would be an example where you could say either control who gets the density, who retains the benefit from that equity, or control the trickle down effects of having somebody jack up housing costs next to these existing residents, whether they're renters or homeowners, and say, you know, maybe there's like, instead of worrying about rent stabilization per se, when there's certain things you can't control as a landlord, how about property tax stabilization? If the occupant of the building is the same for more than 5 years, we promise we won't increase your property taxes more than X percentage every year. Something that the taxing agency has the ability to control, if that makes sense.
And we have that in the state of Maryland, where they limit the property tax increases. Joe, your turn.
Great presentation. I'll try to get right to my point. Question. You had mentioned that bottom line is what this is saying is going to make such a major change was all this new housing, more affordable housing. It's just, it didn't happen for you in Minneapolis.
Right, no.
And that wouldn't happen here. I was kind of intrigued by one thing you did say early on. I know it sounds like you make a conscious choice to live in an area of Minneapolis that's one of the more disadvantaged areas in city. I'm curious because you also did say that early in some of the more, I guess, riding areas where you did have, unfortunately, a lot of food, establishments being, raided and a lot of unrest, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And it certainly had to have had a very, I'm curious how that was managed, because obviously I would think that would be a hardship for the the majority of the residents that are living in that impoverished area. And I was just curious, I don't know if it could be tied in necessarily to Thrive, but possibly some of the changes that you guys were making. But I was just curious at your thoughts on that, because you're obviously much closer to that than we were here a couple of years ago. But if that makes sense to you, if you'd be
Yeah,
willing
I
to
think
comment.
so. The George Floyd was murdered in a different area of our city, close to Phillips Powderhorn, which is the if you look at maps of Minneapolis and you look at different disparities, North Minneapolis, which is where I live, which sounds like it's up, but really it's a quadrant to the northwest of the city. Anyway, it's called North. That North Minneapolis and Phillips Powderhorn are the two areas that are always, highest health disparities, biggest economic barriers, lowest jobs, all these things, highest asthma hospitalization rates in the county, those kinds of things. So when the civil unrest happened, we had a lot of people coming into the city. It was really actually a weird time because a lot of stuff that was being done wasn't even, like, I think some of the press made it sound as though like the city was rising up and we were for things, but a lot of the stuff that the burning and the looting and the whatever, if you look back at arrest records, it's a lot of people who came from out state into the city just to destroy crap.
Oh yeah.
The impact it had on our community. So again, that didn't actually happen in my neighborhood, but unrest was everywhere. And we didn't have that many amenities to begin with. So
Right.
we had, I think 2 grocery stores and 1 discount grocery before the civil unrest. We had a few pharmacies. And we had on our, and I have this in the presentation I did before, I think I had this, where on all 3 of our main commercial corridors in North Minneapolis, there's 3 of them. We only had a total of 4 actually sit-down restaurants that weren't fast food in total, like not like per street, like in total. So the impact it had was the fast food places, windows got broken and, they shut down because you can't get supplies delivered. The grocery store got broken into and vandalized, so that shut down. The pharmacies got broken into and vandalized, those got shut down. Right. Metro Transit shut off bus service to the city. Since then, have we recovered? No, I mean, there wasn't that much to recover to, because we haven't created a system where we can actually be self-sustaining. We keep concentrating poverty, which means we don't get the disposable income to create the jobs. Because we don't have the jobs, people have to commute. So we have to forever subsidize our commercial corridors rather than actually investing in a community in a way that allows it to be self-sustaining. So our main grocery store, I say main one, the two groceries, but the main one, they're both up and running again, as is the, which is farther down Lowry. The pharmacy, one of them closed permanently and never opened. The other one is still open, but is having all sorts of issues. And then a lot of the rest of the commercial corridors, I mean, they're a mixed bag. I mean, who wants to take a chance on it? Well, the problem that we're having is there are people who do want to take a chance on investing in businesses, but who owns the land? Oftentimes the businesses, the buildings themselves aren't owned by people in this community. They're owned by people outside of the community who are leery of certain investments that aren't certain things. So like I said, we have check cashing places and cell phone places and you know, all that kind of stuff that is really predatory. We don't have people willing to really take a gamble on bookstores and dry cleaners and gifts. We don't even have we don't even have a Target anymore. Like we get fast food places and convenience stores that now have to open a secondary entrance so they can sell menthol cigarettes. You know, like there's not a lot of places here, even if you had disposable income, to spend it. So I would say, did it impact us? Yes. Did it totally destroy what we had? No, because we didn't have a lot before then.
Got it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Jeff Griffith.
Thank you, Alissa. I'm hoping you could give us some references to some reports or studies that document plans or policies that have been implemented in cities or municipalities or even small communities that actually have been successful in creating more affordable housing.
I was going to ask that question to Alissa. Is there any place where any policies have been successful and did and encouraged more affordable housing?
You know, that's a really good question. I don't know in terms of widespread municipal policy or statewide policy if I've seen very much since, I mean, other than like, if you think about grand gestures such as like the Civil Rights Act in and of itself, making big sweeping changes. But even that, you know, when it's interpreted locally, it kind of loses some of its punch. I would say not as necessarily a municipal policy. I will say just off the cuff, and this again is, I'm sorry, I'm not on the top of my game tonight, but we had something called the Holman Decree here in the cities. And what it was, and I'm going to condense it to a nutshell. So, you know, excuse any, if it's too simplified, but basically the city or whatever, we got sued because we concentrated poverty in one location, and the one location actually happened to be sinking swampland. So all these high-rise multifamily buildings that were built, I would guess 60s, 70s, they tore down in a neighborhood, part of North Minneapolis, and they built these buildings, and then they shoved everybody in them, and they were, you know, depressing and whatever. But they got sued saying you've concentrated poverty. It's a violation of the Civil Rights Act. You have to remedy the situation, and you also, by the way, aren't providing quality housing. It's really dismal and depressing and this, that, and the other. So long story short is because of the Holman Decree, the city or county or everyone lost a lawsuit, and they had to actually tear that down, mediate all the swampland and put in drainage. And then they were ordered to build a mixed income community in its place with people having the right to return. It was done with degrees of success. I would say most people I know that live there consider it to be a success. It's never a perfect thing. I won't say that there aren't places or ways they could have done some things better, but by and large, if you drive through it, you don't tend to go, oh, I'm driving through a place with a lot of subsidized low-income housing. It looks like a thriving, healthy community because it is. So, it's not like policy as much as actually implementing the things we promised we'd do. And when people hold people accountable to do that, then things actually happen. It's when we kind of look the other way and come up with these vague feel good statements that don't amount to anything when the rubber meets the road, that we tend to leave people just floundering.
I think there might be some good examples coming out of Washington, DC, where the mayor seems to have set aside, hundreds of millions, if not $2 billion for a housing finance entity, which is going to do a lot of affordable housing throughout the city.
There's a lot of stuff coming up on the horizon, and part of it is there might have been stuff done, but it just hasn't been widely published, because maybe it was considered too small of a sample size, or it was just one city, but not broad enough, or maybe it was some little policy that made a big difference, but there's cities investing in the policy and not in promoting it, self-promotion. So, I mean, there's got to be stuff out there. I mean, we're not talking about achieving the impossible here. So, but off the top of my head, can I think of a lot of studies right now? No. I will say first-time homebuyer things tend to work if you partner them with classes and especially with a mentor who can help navigate certain systems. It's like anything. If you set systems up with safeguards to predict where people could fall off or to avoid the pitfalls, they tend to be more successful. So I think it's a matter of not reinventing the wheel, but crafting smarter policy from the ground up and filling the gaps when you can anticipate them.
Alissa, one last question, if you would, from Kathleen Sammy. Kathleen?
Yes, Alan, thank you. I'm sorry before it was a mistake. Anyway, thank you so much. I so appreciate your very human-centered approach, everything you talk about. We've talked a lot about affordable housing and the built environment and so many important things. But I want to tell you, in Montgomery County, we have a new climate action plan, and we're calling for reducing carbon 80% in the next 5 years by 2027. And I'm wondering if in reading this policy, you see places where we're really missing on the environment and how we are supposed to reduce that carbon, and just like energy efficiency, but through tree canopy or the safeguards you're talking about, like tree canopy measures, or always low and lower income areas have no trees. And we talk about food deserts, but there's tree deserts. And we have extreme heat in Silver Spring where we live. In the summer, it's 130 to 155 degrees surface temperatures. Most of our urban areas have very low canopy, like Silver Spring is 8%. But I don't find that our county is really looking at these safeguards and measures to set attainable goals to reduce street heat, to reduce surface temperatures. And I'm just wondering, did you do anything like that in Minneapolis? Is there anything that you see in our plan that we should be going to our county council and saying, this is missing, these are suggestions, these are recommendations, this is what we should do? Anyway, tell me what.
Yeah, so off the cuff in the plan, again, not with a fine tooth comb, but in general, it seemed to be really vague. It just seemed mainly reliance on if we reduce automobile usage, well, that's our, look, we're green. I would actually push for more, I would push for more energy efficiency in buildings, whether it's new construction or retrofitting old buildings. But again, insulation, and then more efficient systems when you've got a better insulated envelope, a higher R-valued roof, higher R-value walls. Don't worry about the windows. Literally, the payback period for putting in brand new windows compared to one single pane wood windows, it's beyond the life of the windows that you're putting in. So it's not actually worth it from a sustainability standpoint. You have more stuff going to the landfill than the windows that are meant to be repaired. So don't do that. But and then like coupled with things that actually generate energy, those two things are big in the plan. Big, but they're not really pushed in the plan. I would say specifically, I think they're kind of just enamored with this reducing greenhouse gases. You're totally right
about environmental solution, natural environmental solutions.
Yeah. So then
nature.
If they want, they need to get, when they have their plan book that they're creating of house plans, which could be a good tool, or it could just really be awful, to be honest. That should have things like passive heating and cooling method, how do you orient the house on the lot? Where are the windows? Do you have sizable overhangs? Is it a solar roof? What's the heat source? How are you, do you have bedrooms with on corners so you can have cross ventilation through windows, or do you only put windows in the front and the back, which is just stupid? Those kinds of little design things that they could do. Yeah, I mean, obviously the tree canopy, I don't know if you guys have this in your zoning code. We have minimum required tree and shrub counts. And we also have a maximum impervious surface coverage for our lots. Now, having said that, they vary a lot, so then it's not really a minimum if you don't make people do it. But it's important. When we had a tornado go through Minneapolis about 11 years ago now, gosh, it actually wiped out over, I think, 2,000 trees. I actually went diagonally right through North Minneapolis. So my neck of the woods, actually the house I live in now had the roof torn off and lost a bunch of trees. So homeowners and renters immediately saw an impact on the cost of air conditioning because all of a sudden houses that had been shaded by these 110-year-old trees were all of a sudden just baking in the heat. So it makes a huge difference. And that's not even having to do with the air quality in terms of like, the benefits that greenery brings to cleaning the air. So I think you're completely right. One of the things we found, well, let me back up. So our 2040 plan was adopted. The zoning code was changed to support it, blah, blah, blah. There was a big lawsuit. And the city technically lost, but they're appealing. So actually it's a weird thing. And it was brought about because of the environmental impacts due to the implementation of the 2040 plan. Environmental activists pointed out that it would actually be very harmful to our environment and that there was no environmental study done. So one of the things that we noticed when we looked at the data was in the 1 year that we approved, by we, I mean the city, not me personally. In the year between adoption of the plan and amendment of the zoning code, we allowed things to get approved that weren't allowed under the existing zoning code, but specifically cited the new plan as the justification for allowing it anyway. So we were able to track exactly what things were getting approved because of the new plan that wouldn't have been allowed under the old plan, right? So it was this magic year actually of data. And what we found was that an astronomically huge amount of projects were getting approved that were getting variances of their required minimum tree and shrub count and variances of their maximum impervious surface coverage. And that was because they were building bigger and denser and they wanted to occupy the whole lot. It wasn't because they were building surface parking, because we didn't allow that, or didn't require that anymore, I should say. And in some places we flat out didn't allow it. So what we surmised was because of the lot coverage they were able to do and then maximizing density, they hadn't left enough green space possible for a tree to survive. So they couldn't physically plant one or show it on the plan even because it wouldn't survive. So they couldn't include it toward the tree minimum that we were required in the city. So they were getting variances. Instead of the city saying, well, you better redesign your building to have more green space. We just were like, well, sustainability, So it matters, and it mattered to this lawsuit. So that's the thing too, is the environmental impacts of this. I mean, I don't know if their city's tracking this lawsuit at all. If their lawyers are at all worth their snuff, they should be. But it's pretty compelling in that it might make Minneapolis have to revert back to the previous comprehensive plan and zoning code purely because of the detrimental environmental impacts of the 2040 plan. It's kind of fascinating from like an academic standpoint. It's going to be a big mess in practice.
Thank you. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, thank you.
Alissa, we want to thank you so much for joining us from Minneapolis this evening. We learned a lot. It's going to take us a while to process it. And do you have any parting remarks for our group and our struggle here in Montgomery County?
I just, I don't know. I feel really bad that it's kind of a meandering discussion. So I'm very sorry. I guess the only things I would say is just really try to nail down specific measurable goals and accountability to those goals. Don't let someone get away with a policy that's so vague that, you could fit like a bus through it, like there should be something that they can actually point to say, this is the outcome we would expect. You won't go to a doctor and have them say, well, this may or may not help you. They would say, well, if this works, we'll see this to this much change in this symptom you're having, right? Like, why would we do any less here? So
Well,
I would see just accountability.
You made a comment early on about accountability and people going on to greener pastures. Yeah. We have seen precious little accountability here. And some of the people who've been most involved in the development of this strategy are either moving from the county council or leaving from the planning commission and won't be here 3 years, 5 years, 10 years now to be evaluated for what they do. So that's a problem that we struggle with and have been struggling with for the last 20 years. On behalf of the Montgomery County Civic Federation, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we'll keep you posted with developments in Montgomery County.
Awesome. And good luck. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, that was amazing. And we have a recording, so we'll be able to go over and listen to it many times and hear the things that we missed during this conversation. Now, what I wanted to do at this point is, because we have a bunch of our delegates here, is that I wanted you all to consider a resolution that Liz, Joyce, and I drafted this afternoon that sort of raises some of the issues. The idea would be to, if we pass this resolution, would be to send it to the county council. I'm going to share my screen for and do two things. One thing was breaking news. Let's see if this is it. Share screen. Let's see here. Yeah, so can you guys see my screen? Can you see my screen? Just nod your heads.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mentioned at the outset that just today, the county executive transmitted a memorandum to the council president, Gabe Albernas. And just to put a fine point on it, I just want to look at he was responding to the racial equity, social justice report that was put together by the, I don't know how you pronounce it, NISPR Green and Public Engagement Associates, a consultant team hired by the county council. We'll post this on the Civic Federation Facebook page. But the notable paragraph is paragraph 2. It's highlighted in bold relief. The county executive writes, based on the findings of the consultant team and the significant changes they recommend, I urge the council to disapprove Thrive 2050 to allow more outreach to BIPOC and low-income residents. The many recommendations in the report addressing racial equity and social justice should be given full consideration. Disapproving Thrive 2050 is now drafted would also allow sufficient time for additional public hearings and departmental review. So that's hot off the press from the county executive today. I would let you guys know that tomorrow, the county council is going to have a conversation on the racial equity and social justice review of the planning of the Fed committee draft. Looks like it's late in the morning, 11 o'clock, and they'll have the consultants there. So those of you who want to listen to the consultants firsthand over cable TV or go to the council, you can hear their conclusions. Somebody mentioned to me, I wasn't at one of the public hearings, or maybe the public hearing that the consultants had. I think one of the people who was responsible for the study said there was no way they were going to be able to do a good study in 12 weeks. I don't even think it was 12 weeks. They wanted a year to do a study that would be useful for Montgomery County. And they admitted candidly that they don't have enough time. So tomorrow, the county council is going to talk about this draft. If you've got concerns and comments, please send them to the county council. So I thought that was interesting, and that was timing. I wonder if it had anything to do with our meeting. I'd like to think so, but I don't know. But I wanted to talk to you delegates about a resolution that we would like the membership to consider. And let me see here. We had really good success last time. Karen, do you want to read it? Karen, are you here?
Karen, as in me?
Yeah, as in you. You were so good. You were so good reading the resolution last time. Do you want to read this one?
All 3 pages of it?
It's only, no, it's not 3 pages. It's, well, it's
3 there.
Yeah, but I think the last page is just your name.
Oh, all right, all right. Sure, I'll be happy to read it. I'll be interested to see what it says. Okay. Resolution of the Montgomery County Civic Federation, Inc. Inc. Thrive Montgomery 2050 and Upzoning. Whereas the Montgomery County Civic Federation, Inc., hereinafter the Federation, has taken serious interest in the development and drafting of the proposed 30-year general plan authored by the Montgomery County Planning Board, known as Thrive Montgomery 2050. And whereas the Federation has taken note of the many community-based efforts around the county to inform county residents of the goals of the proposed general plan and the various problematic issues associated with it. And whereas the Federation strongly believes in the value and necessity of general planning, which has the support of the broad community and which has allowed for broad-based community input. And whereas the Federation has regularly expressed concern about the Montgomery County Council's decision-making timetable for finalization of the draft plan, as it has stated its goal to complete its deliberations on the draft plan and to hold a final vote on the draft plan by the end of October 2022. And whereas the Federation delegates believe that there has been grossly inadequate public outreach and community engagement related to the draft plan, resulting in a lack of community ownership in the draft plan and its proposed objectives and manner of implementation. And whereas the Federation delegates have identified serious shortcomings in the draft plan under consideration by the Council's Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee, specifically related to the issues of affordable housing, gentrification, environmental sustainability, economic development, and racial justice and social equity. And whereas the Federation strongly believes that both the draft plan and the community engagement process are deeply flawed and require serious revision, therefore, be it resolved, the Montgomery County Civic Federation, Inc. calls upon the current Montgomery County Council to pause its deliberations and a final vote on the draft Thrive Montgomery 2050, and to carry those deliberations and final vote over to the new county council to be seated in December 2022, and calls upon the Montgomery County Council to draft and include new standalone chapters in the draft document pertaining to the environment, economic development, housing, and racial equity and social justice issues. Calls upon the Montgomery County Council to reaffirm a commitment to adequate public consultations about the draft plan, specifically requesting that the county council hold separate public hearings on all new chapters added to the draft plan, as well as a final public hearing on any revised draft document developed by council staff, and calls upon the Montgomery County Council to reaffirm a commitment to the master planning process for the implementation of any zoning changes suggested by the draft plan, and calls upon the Montgomery County Council and Planning Board to clarify the definition of, quote, limited growth, unquote, areas in the new growth map, page 20, and identify the changes in zoning and master planning that will result from defining these formerly suburban and residential areas as, quote, limited growth, unquote, areas, and remains opposed to universal upzoning of all single family and duplex by right by zoning text amendments. Calls upon the county council to include adequate safeguards for this proposed policy to protect against unintended consequences, including 1, an owner occupancy requirement for new housing in neighborhoods, precluding absentee investor landlords. 2, ensuring adequate public facilities before new development is approved. And 3, the provision of metrics for success and methods to test effectiveness of the plan. Probably need a therefore in there. Therefore, I would say, urges the Montgomery County Council to extend the period for outreach to Montgomery County residents by its consultants regarding racial equity and social justice issues, taking note of the fact that the current studies organizers have expressed their view that an adequate study in Montgomery County would take at least a year and not the several weeks as been requested by the council, and calls upon its member associations and individuals to convey these important messages to their members and neighbors. Approved this 12th day of September 2022.
So thank you so much, Karen Cordry, for reading this draft resolution that was prepared today. I think the first thing we need to do is we need 5-member associations to agree to consider this resolution. And I'm not sure how to get back to the big screen. I think I stopped sharing. So pause share, stop share. Excuse me. And we've got some.
Can you put the text in the chat then or something, if you're gonna take it off the screen?
Can I put the whole?
Well, are
thing?
you taking it off the screen or are you gonna leave it up? Because I do have a question about.
I am gonna leave it up, but I just
Oh,
wanted,
okay.
I did want to get to see if we have HQ in the house. Okay, let's see what we have here.
I'd like to second the motion or third the motion or whatever it is.
Just very quickly, could you, Alan, just post the link to the document, the Google Doc, in the chat? Is that a possibility?
I will do that, and we'll see if anybody can access that.
I just have a question about the owner occupancy requirement.
Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
Is that like, I don't see how the council can require that new housing be owner occupied. So I just wondering the context of that. Are you saying that if something is rezoned, for example, or something changes from a single family to a triplex, that part of it be owner occupied? Or I think that phrasing is a little off.
Okay, I'm still trying to figure out how to get everybody back here.
Yeah, can you scroll down to that part of it, Alan? Because that was a question I had as well.
All right, so that was there. Yeah, that's what we're looking at, all right? It's crazy. Everybody see that's what we were talking about, this area in here? Owner occupancy requirement precluding absentee and
If it becomes either a triplex or a quadplex or larger.
so that's me what for new owner occupancy for new duplex, triplex or quadplex housing.
Well, you can't, yeah, you can't.
Family housing.
No, you can't say that. I mean, they build housing all the time that's duplexes in other places. They don't require that it be owner occupied. So I'm just wondering what we're trying to get to there.
Yeah, and how long do they have to be how long do they have to own it?
So two things. One is, and I pulled some of these requirements from work that Alissa Pier had done when she said in one of her articles that I posted on Facebook and sent around to some of you, that one of the ways to get around the problem of the absentee and the nationwide real estate investors buying up all the property and then renting it and letting it run down was to have an owner occupancy requirement. So I got that from her, along with the metrics for success and the public facilities. So my thought about this is, and like I said, we just drafted this today, pulled some information from some of the literature was out there. Seems to me that we can call on them to do this. If it can't be done, it can't be done.
No.
Well, are you saying, maybe what you're saying is when a single family, building is replaced with a multiplex building, that it include an owner occupancy?
So is that what we're talking about, new multiplex housing in neighborhoods?
Well, I mean, otherwise you're saying if someone tears down their house and replaces their house, that has to be owner occupied. I don't see how you can require that. I think what you're trying to get at is replacing existing housing.
Alan, wait a second.
Yep.
Wait a second. So does that do it?
No. It's
No,
including-
yes.
Personally, I'd make that a little bit more fluid. Something about encourage. First of all, you cannot preclude absentee investor landlords because that's a taking. You just can't do it. Basically, what you can say is that the county should encourage owner-occupied housing, particularly in neighborhoods that are undergoing multifamily conversions.
So we're
How
We're
about,
talking-
I'm going to give you one other suggestion, which means that we don't have to decide all these legal issues right this moment. How about considering an owner occupancy requirement for new multiplex housing in order to discourage absentee investor landlord?
okay, one more time. I like that.
I
Considering,
would
Considering
support that.
considering,
the
Yes.
owner occupancy requirement for new multiplex housing. Just keep all that.
No occupancy requirement for new multiple. Yeah.
Yeah, in order to discourage absentee investor landlords.
No, again, you don't need that. You just say the owner occupancy requirement for new multiplex housing. That will take care of it.
Yep.
You don't have to preclude any. Yeah, that's good.
All right, that's fine too, yeah. I mean, let somebody else sort out exactly what that means, but at least it gives us the point of what we're trying to do, which is.
Right.
And it's what they claim they want to do anyway, so.
Yeah. And that is the advantage of encouraging condominium ownership, which is possibly nice. Additionally, up in the policy section, we're adding a housing chapter. I would say housing, including affordable housing.
okay.
Yep. So, yeah.
Yeah, this
So,
is,
yeah, housing, and then parentheses, including affordable housing, or housing affordable to households making 80% of area median income or
what
below.
about this? What about especially affordable housing?
Okay, that's fine.
Alan, I was going to say that if you want to look at the MPDU legislation, you may find some language in there that applies to owner occupancy and retention of the MPDUs.
I don't know that we're going to be able to do that tonight.
No, not tonight, but I mean, for future reading.
This is to get it to them so they can
Yeah.
digest it along with the county executive's message about the racial equity and social
The other
justice.
thing I would suggest too is since we're sending this, and we were so effective because we had other organizations that signed on with us, that we should send it to like the Taxpayer League and these other organizations that have piled on, which resulted in the delay we've seen.
Yeah, we're going to talk about another letter which is floating around right now if Diane Cameron is still on the call. What about, so, sorry, I've got all this stuff on my screen here. Let me just
You
go
need
back.
you need 4 seconds.
I need what?
4 seconds to put the motion in, and I second it.
Okay,
My hands up.
well, so is mine.
Wait a minute, hold on. Let me get, okay, so we have Jerry. And
Jeff.
Jerry, who?
Yeah, I second it. I second it. You need 4 seconds.
Jeff Griffith,
Paul Jarasinski, Cherrywood.
Alan Mars, Maplewood.
Third, whatever.
I think.
Tell you what, everybody who's gonna second it, put it in the chat, and that way I don't have to try to hear everybody and find everybody. And put your organization in there too, if you would.
I think when I stop sharing it, I'll be able to see everybody on the call. We're down to 40 people, but that's still enough. And does this reflect our collective, our consensus as of September 12th, 2022?
If we're concerned about absentee landlords, can we ask them to ban private equity and investment groups from purchasing or building
You
residential
cannot do
properties?
that.
Could you let me finish my sentence, please? Why can't we ban private equity and investment groups from purchasing or building residential properties in the county.
You can't do that. And
Why?
you
That,
can't-
well,
Okay,
that's
the way,
that-
the reason you can't do that is it's again, it's sort of it's a taking, it's overly broad. Private equity does not necessarily, basically, private equity finances an awful lot of stuff, including conventional property, including supermarkets, including industrial property.
I just said
You
residential.
cannot do that, but you can't do it. It's just wrong. It's too broad. It's radical. It's too broad.
Hey, can I bring up
understand
something?
that. I understand Jackie's point, but I disagree with it. You cannot prohibit, that's too broad a prohibition.
I mean, in many situations, you can't even require that the county government just buy from Montgomery County. You know,
Right.
that there's intercommerce laws about that. But I don't
Can I
think we
bring up
have,
something?
yeah, go ahead.
It's my understanding that the planning board put this into action about a year ago. And it has to be decided upon. Like the county council has to extend it by 2 weeks every time to keep it from being approved. And so basically after a year, it has to be disapproved or approved. You can't extend it. If you don't, if the county council does not act on it, it's going to be approved.
So,
That's
so
what-
there,
If
so there is,
somebody more knowledgeable in the law might know that here, but this is what they were saying in Friendship Heights and some of their literature. that-
Alan, there's a proposal tomorrow that it be extended to November 15th that the council is considering.
Well, that
Yeah, I
may
was
be
going
as long as you can extend it, but the point is it cannot be extended forever.
Right.
It has
Well,
to
once
be.
it goes to another
disapproved at some
council,
point
they
in time.
probably have to vote on it again anyway. A new council probably have to reintroduce it, but
So let's just get it disapproved.
Yeah, I think-
That's why.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
That's
that's why the
why,
executive did what he did.
right, so I mean, we stand with the executive and I think some other.
That's why he has disapprove in it and his statement.
Right,
Yes.
and
I
yeah,
think we should follow that.
they could,
Agreed.
they could lapse. I mean, you're suggesting that we use that,
Yes.
use that wording?
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
Calls, so that would be go to pauses, the pauses, deliberations and a final.
To
to
disapprove.
disapprove.
Yes.
By rejecting.
Yes. Disapprove.
Disapprove the
Yes.
Thrive Montgomery 2050. What is it? Document, what is it?
Plan.
General
Plan.
plan.
Plan. Period.
Yeah.
Period.
Yes.
Yes.
And then it's up. and
Comma, and to prepare, carry these deliberations over.
then- All right, so we like that?
There would have to be a new plan put forward. You
Yeah,
can't carry something
yeah.
over if you're
Well,
gonna
they would be,
approve it.
they would be,
Right.
yeah,
No
they
more
would be.
deliberating. Right.
Well, you're.
The new council would have to come for a new plan.
Yeah, so
Right.
does this work to disapprove the Thrive Montgomery plan and to carry these deliberations over to the new
Yeah.
council to be seated?
On mute now.
I don't know what they're carrying over if they just approved it. I think it's
Right.
all clear.
Yeah.
So you-
I would just leave it at disapprove.
It's okay.
They're carrying over the deliberations.
If I want to vote on something,
Like that?
Yes.
I guess just so you're not like saying that you never would consider, and leave any further consideration of these issues to the new council.
Yeah.
I think it's
good.
important that we're going to hold the new council accountable. I think that's
Exactly.
very,
I think that's the main point. Is that council should be aware that they should be responsible for this.
they're on the line because they're the ones
So
that
you can
have to
type
implement
something in
whatever
there.
it
I
is.
can't type it in. Okay, forget it. Okay.
So does that work right now to carry these
just-
deliberations over to the new council? That makes the point about a new council.
Yeah,
and they should
period.
consider it.
Then period.
Well, it's a
You don't
clause.
need
so-
to,
No,
you don't need the next one then that says you ask them to draft and include new standalone chapters. Yours, the one above, you just said that you just said, you just disapprove it.
All
What
right.
about
Don't
that?
say any of the other stuff.
What about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
The new county council?
Yes, and calls upon the new, yes.
And then we want to,
Each one.
we want to call upon the new county council to reaffirm its commitment to
Yeah.
public,
Yes,
Yeah, the next one too.
requesting that the new county council,
calls upon the Montgomery County Council.
we want to reaffirm,
Calls upon the new,
The new.
Okay,
Yep.
there we go.
and then the next one, also new.
we could, yeah, well, we
He
could,
used new all the way through.
and the new planning board.
Yeah,
We could-
Yeah.
it's a good thought. Yes,
we could
Well,
be,
the new can apply to both.
yes.
okay, and then, we remain opposed to universal upzoning.
Yep,
We'll call upon the new county council
yep.
to include adequate safeguards.
Agreed,
Um,
new.
And then we have the owner occupancy piece, which is love working with you guys. All right, what am I doing? Control B. There we go. Control I.
Hey, Alan, it's Kathleen Sammy. What about the accountability piece? Is that in here that Alissa was talking about? To do accountability?
Hard
She was
to,
talking about thresholds.
Yes,
and
it is.
accountability. And if
I
you
know, I
don't
mean,
have-
so we know from our experience that there is no accountability,
Mhm.
right?
Exactly.
I mean, we know that. I mean, look at, and for us, Kathleen, look at the purple line, right? Where all those people have gone on to greener pastures. Nobody,
You might want to say when in the part that's talking about metrics, which does address
Yes.
the accountability issue, but you might want to say concrete metrics or specific metrics or something like that.
Well, and Alissa talked about like, percentiles, like she talked about, the whole footprint, they have impervious surface limitations and canopy tree counts, and there's none of that in this whole plan. There's no threshold metrics,
Nothing.
nothing. It's just a
Nothing.
free-for-all.
Yes.
well, I know, so that's why we put in that we need metrics without
Okay.
getting into specifics about tree canopy and,
Yeah, well,
greener-
that doesn't work.
I disagree. I disagree. If we're going to talk for individual chapters, we need, if they want to know what we're talking about. If we're going to be broad and say it needs accountability and there need to be metrics, we need to say what we're looking for in that.
I don't think this can get that specifically detailed. We need
Thank
to.
And you
Jeff.
do want them to read it, and you want other people to sign this to read it too.
Right,
And if it gets to be
otherwise, we're
20 or 30
gonna be
pages.
arguing over specifics ad infinitum. By the way, just as a small pun, I take out the concrete and put in specific, because concrete is a bad word.
Well, I think at least by example,
Okay. You could you could say such, including but not limited to, and then it lists several. If you want.
we could,
Can you say specific metrics, measure and measures?
They're fighting over.
Specific metrics, measures, and methods of success?
specific
Okay.
metrics, what?
Methods, metrics, measures and methods for success.
What's the difference between measures and metrics?
none.
A measure is how you do something, a metric is how you measure it. We're
Could we
determining
stop-
success.
Could we please stop nitpicking on the
Yeah,
text and get
Yeah.
on with it?
yeah.
We're
Thank
getting
you.
on, we're getting on with it. So with those changes, what do you all think?
We need one other change on the first line.
What?
First line should have ink.
Well, I have this ink right here, Civic Federation ink.
That's it.
But further up, before
And
that,
then put it, oh, well,
that should have a capital I.
yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
all right. I have
Um,
Jerry Garson. Jerry, what organization are you?
Regency Estate Citizens Association.
All right, so I have Jerry Garson, Regency Estate Civic Association, Jeff Griffith, Parkwood, Paul Jarozinski, Cherrywood, Elizabeth Joyce, Second Saratoga, Jackie Boca, Northwood Four Corners, Alan Myers, Maplewood, Ira Unger, Kent Mill, myself, Kensington Heights. Anyone else?
Alan Bowser, Park Hills.
That's certainly more than the 5 we need.
Now, I'd like, this is Jerry, I'd like to offer one other comment, which everyone keeps talking about affordable housing. Interest rates are now at 6%, and assuming they fall down to 5%, a 720,000 unit of a quadplex or a triplex or whatever will require $4,000 monthly payment for each unit. And nothing can be built affordable, charging $4,000 a month rent.
We appreciate the information, Jerry, but not really germane to what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Which is, I'll entertain a motion to for this resolution. Somebody want to move that we
call a question.
Federation accept the this resolution as
I call the question.
John, I'm leaving the meeting.
Does somebody want to make a motion?
He called the question.
I know, but you gotta go through the first, you gotta make the motions, then you can call a question.
Right, I agree with you.
So somebody want to make a motion to move?
So
I
move.
make a motion to move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Question's been called.
Somebody want to call the question now?
Call the question.
All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed?
No.
1. Chris Reynolds, 7 Oaks. Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion is, the resolution is passed. Thank you all very much. Okay, so we got that work done. The next thing,
Are
we had
we
the,
also assuming that that's going to be transmitted to anybody and everybody that we can think of?
yeah, Teresa, did you post that in the chat? That was an abstention from Teresa.
Okay, I'll
That's,
put that one down too.
is that in the chat? Yeah, Kenwood Condo. Gotcha. Okay, Diane Cameron, are you still on the call? Diane,
Still here.
do you want to talk about the letter and give us the link again?
Yes, and I just put the link in the chat again to the sign on. There's a sign on letter that is calling on the county council to pause Thrive. And since County Executive Elrich and now with the new Civic Fed resolution are calling to disapprove Thrive, and it's really the same set of reasons. So it's all consistent, and I encourage you all to check out the sign-on letter. It highlights 2 of the many reasons to pause Thrive or vote no on Thrive, being the lack of a real plan for affordable housing is a big factor that this letter highlights. And another big factor is the predicted increased flooding from the increased imperviousness and cutting down of trees. So there's also been huge gaps in public participation. So on the process side, Thrive is fatally flawed as well. So
thank you, Diane.
encouraging sign-ons.
A lot of groups, a lot of individuals collaborated in drafting that letter. It's a good letter. She's posted the link in the chat. I think you can click on links in the chat and it goes places. It's also, a link will be on the Civic Federation. It's already on the Civic Federation. Well, the letter is on the Civic Federation Facebook page, and we'll put a link there at the end of this meeting. So thank you, Diane, for all your work on that.
Thank you, Alan.
The storm, the tree canopy issues, the stormwater issues, the impervious surface issues are really important, and they don't get as much attention as they deserve. But we have we have a climate emergency that we're facing, and just look at your backyards and see how much erosion has taken place. That's really what we had on sort of Thrive related issues. The presentation by Alissa Pier, she was tremendous. I hope you all get a chance to go back and look at the video and see some of the nuances of the thing that she was saying. On the Facebook page, we posted an article where she was interviewed, I think 2019, and basically talking about the unintended consequences and the guardrails that are needed for a general plan like this. And that's the reason why I wanted to have her talk this evening, because our county council is poised to take up these issues. And sadly, there still has not been the kind of community engagement and outreach that we would expect, or that we were used to before the pandemic. And even now, we've got the consultants for the racial equity and social justice study who are saying that they can't do a decent report in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, or I'd say 2 months. They need a year, because it's a big problem in Montgomery County, a huge county with more than 1 million people, more than some states. Before I forget, I want to wish Carrie Lamari a speedy recovery from his recent health issues. Carrie, we're glad to see you on the call tonight, and God bless you're still here to help us with these deliberations. We've had 3 candidates for office who joined our debate tonight, and we appreciate them joining our conversation to learn more about Thrive and to hear what their neighbors are saying about affordable housing and environmental sustainability and economic development. Alissa Pier is a real resource, and it's too bad we can't really sort of pick her brain all the time. But we have other great leaders on this call: Diane Cameron, Catherine Sammy, Peggy Dennis. Who else is here? Carrie Lamari, Joyce, Elizabeth. Lots of people. Jackie Boko. We've got lots of people. So it's 10 o'clock right now. Usually what we do at this point is, well, let me make a couple of points that I think Jerry made at the beginning. We need everybody who represents a civic association or homeowners associations to pay their dues for the 2022-2023 membership year. It's not very expensive. We've had some problems getting that information out. We'd like to transition to a more automated setting where you could put in your information and get automatic renewals at a given time. But right now, we're still using the web page for your information and PayPal for your link. So please pay your dues. It's not very much. We'd also like any individuals on the call who'd like to be members of the Civic Fed that you can join as a member too, and it's not very expensive. What else did I want to say to you? I am term limited as president, and we haven't had anybody step up to be president of the Civic Fed. They say that the hardest job the Civic Federation president has is to find somebody else to be the next Civic Federation president. So we're looking for a candidate. So those of you who are still on the call who might be interested, please, contact me or one of the other members of the executive committee. We usually go through our committees. We're going to, since it's 10:02, just going to say that Peggy Dennis has been our stalwart chair of the legislation committee. We're trying to develop a program of legislation we would like to see the General Assembly, our delegation, take up in the 2023 Assembly year. If you've got any suggestions about state level legislation you'd like us to advocate for, I'd be glad to do that. We will also, I think our highest priority is at the county level would be for the Office of the People's Council, which quite frankly, the county council disappointed us after they made representations that they would support it. They did not. They talked about how they would consider it more or less favorably in a supplemental. I think they were waiting for some information to come from the county executive about how narrowly tailored that was going to be. So we'll be pushing for the Office of the People's Council, which we think is really important for the kind of work we do. And we'll be pushing for various things at the state level that will benefit civic associations and homeowners associations.
Before we leave legislative, can I mention something that we should push for?
Sure.
I've been looking at to buy an EV. There used to be a $3,000 tax credit in the state for buying an EV. The governor let it lapse. And I think we should be asking the legislature to get that reimposed. Depends how the politics go and who's the new governor, but it would be worth fighting for, something that we can do as an organization.
That's good. Peggy did send a note out to all of the members of the Montgomery County delegation, delegates and senators. We only got 4 replies so far, but one of them was for tax credits for EVs. So there's a lot of energy efficiency, climate change related stuff on their agenda.
I should be seeing my delegation shortly. I hope so. I will mention it to them.
Okay, Peggy Dennis.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I think we should be far more proactive and put together a number of issues that we want to see our delegation bring up this coming year, rather than just asking them what their issues are. They do have a meeting in the autumn to work on the issues for the whole delegation, so that we need to be able to tie in with them before that meeting happens. So if anyone can think of other state issues, please contact me and let me know. And I will tell you one that I'm working on. Maryland has a lemon law that applies to cars. We have no lemon law that applies to freezers and refrigerators, which are one of the most essential home appliances people invest in. We've had a terrible situation with 2 different freezers, each one failing 3 times before the Frigidaire company agreed to give us our money back. I think when a refrigerator or a freezer is a lemon, people should not have to go through disasters over and over and over again. So that's
I think we agree with you, Peggy. I think we agree with you. I mean, I'd also like to see the bottle deposit bill passed too. Yeah. So we'll push that. Elizabeth Joyce, did you have something to say?
Yes, I did. I think that we need to propose, given the number of serious ethical complaints against the chair of the Montgomery County Planning Board, and the fact that the state legislation allows the planning board to police itself as to ethics. It's not accountable to any external agency. Last year, we complained to the Attorney General, and his only recourse was to refer the complaint to the Ethics Department of the Planning Board, of which the Planning Board chair of our county is the Vice President. So there needs to be some legislation to require some external accountability for ethics violations for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission.
I think we agree with that, and that we pushed that a little bit last year too. Maybe Al Carr is no longer a delegate. Maybe he can help us with some of this legislation. Anybody else have anything they'd like to say for the good of the order?
Yes, it's Joe Awkward.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. I know in the past we've encouraged a debate, and I'm proposing that we consider doing a debate for our county executive race coming up in November. I think in the past there has been some sponsorship to encourage a debate to occur.
So we've got an executive committee next Thursday. We'll talk about that. I mean, people wanted us to do county council races too.
Sure.
We just don't have the bandwidth, but I think there might be some value in a county executive race.
I would agree. Yeah.
And so maybe we'll do that. It all depends on bandwidth, because
yes, of course,
we've got limited bandwidth. Really need
Understood.
everybody to pay their dues, really would like some suggestions about new officers, committee chairs, executive committee members, and executive officers. And reminding you again that any of your groups, we're going to try to do another contingent. As a contingent, I'm not sure that's the right word, and the Thanksgiving parade. We did one for the Civic
Oh, nice.
Federation last year. Jerry and I were by ourselves. So I don't know that we got a lot of Civic Federation people, but maybe we can get some representatives from our members to march in the parade behind
Yeah, your
Jerry's car.
sign was not big enough. You couldn't see who you represented.
No, it's because Jerry wrote it on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper.
I
with
know, my
Sharpie.
point.
Right, exactly. So we'll try to do that. But if you wanted to do that on your own, I definitely encourage it. It's good fun, and you get some balloons, you pass some stuff out to the kids and the audience, and it's a good way to build camaraderie among your neighbors.
Absolutely.
So, anybody else have anything for the good order? Joan, it's so nice to see you. Luella, Kira, Leanne, very thoughtful comments. And Leanne, if you want to do more for us, please let us know. We could use your expertise.
Okay, thank you.
Nice to see you, Dick. And if there's nothing else, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
And seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 All right, you guys take care. And just want to let you know we may change the programming for the October meeting. So stay tuned
Okay.
for that. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you.